All right, everybody, welcome back to the Pro Physique Code. And today we have a really fun episode because we've all heard about diet and training and nutrition and cardio, but maybe the most burgeoning kind of science around contest prep and around competing and maybe even fat loss is the idea of a healthy mindset or a healthy mental approach to that process. And so for that reason, I've got Evan Wells here, who is the opposite of mentally well, but I have my Pro Physique's very own mental health expert, Danika, who also does consultations just around that. You said you just got off a call, right?
I did, yes.
So this is really in your wheelhouse as a coach, as a competitor yourself, as a former world champion. For those that don't know, Danika won the Yorton Cup, which is the world championships of the OCP. We won't say what year, but it was a few years ago.
A while, just a few.
Yes, a few. So this is really because I used to work, I'm sure you're familiar with Corey Probst,
Yep.
with Dr. Joe. She was kind of the person that back when I got into the sport, she was the one talking about this stuff the most, right? And she was a competitor who had gone on to get her PhD and really come back and felt like she was able to add value. So let's talk a little bit about where your desire to kind of help with this space stems from. Was it from your own experiences figuring crap out, or helping your clients, or a combination, or,
Yeah, I feel like it definitely was a combination, but I have always been interested in psychology and human behavior and mental wellness. Honestly, ever since I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes when I was 11. And I knew that at that age, people probably should have asked me, like, how are you doing emotionally and mentally? And no one really did. And so I kind of took it upon myself I was a 3-sport athlete, and I just made sure to check in with myself during that time. I had great parents, but I think that they weren't fully equipped. And I think doctors just prescribed medication. So then walking through high school, college, graduate school, and then competing, I just noticed that there wasn't nobody was asking. They were like, oh, what's your nutrition like? What's your training like? How are you progressing? No one was asking, how are you feeling? How are you emotionally? But people I trained in person, so they would volunteer the information, and I'd be like, this is what people really want to talk about. And then after a session, I noticed that their sessions would get better, and their progress would get better as they started to kind of open up and talk about all of that stuff. So, and the competition world, I really noticed a lot of my competitors, and for myself too, my previous coaches, I've worked with a couple of coaches, and there wasn't the question of, you're doing great hitting your macros and you're doing great getting your cardio in and everything like that, but overall, how are you feeling? That just would have been amazing to know that there was more to just oh, she's checking these boxes only and she's doing great. To see myself, me as a competitor, as a whole person, it would have been nice, just to have that little, I don't know, to care, right? To
yeah.
show you genuinely care about the person as a whole being, that other components of them outside of nutrition, training, sleep, water, there are other things that are going to influence their progress and their state of progress, how they're doing, and their ability to be completely engaged in programming. So for me, it was personal experience, definitely the athletes that I worked with, what I found worked, what kind of communication styles worked, how in tuned I was with their emotional state, and how I kind of worked with their programming based off of that too. I just found that it really made a huge difference when that part of it was also recognized.
Yeah, I think so. We've done a couple podcasts, me, Evan, and Lexi, on green flags and red flags of prep. And I think going into that a little bit, one of the green flags, one of the things we talked about that we noticed, one of the traits of successful competitors is they have an identity outside of the sport. It
Mhm.
doesn't become their whole life. Not to say that you don't invest a lot into it, but one of the things I worry about most are when my clients check in and they're like, Coach, I'm doing everything perfect. I live, eat, and breathe this sport, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, great. This is going to be a tough ending, right? Because there's only one girl that gets to say she's the best competitor in the world. And even that girl has to someday lose, right? So I don't know. I just, for me, that stuff is way more important than the stuff on stage because you're going to win or lose based on who shows up. But the stuff that happens outside the sport's really going to determine your long-term happiness and success. And I mean, I'm glad that we pay attention to a lot of those things because I had an experience like yours with my first coach who was Lane, who's, you know, he was ahead of his time as far as his nutrition and training and all those protocols. But, you know, it was also a 2-word reply, like great job or add 10 carbs, or, you know, there was never like a, hey man, how's your week going? How you feeling?
Right.
Whereas I think we as coaches, me, Evan, all the, you know, prep coaches, yourself, we're talking and going, okay, you know, we're asking for wellness scores. How was your sleep? How was your stress? How was your hunger levels? Some of those things are related. Um, so let's talk a couple situations. Like, what are some situations that you've seen a competitor in that you feel is okay? Maybe competing's not right for you.
Well, I mean, I just got off a call and I find that that transition from like prep and being of course there's this degree of you have to be structured, you have to be organized, you got to kind of hit your bullet points and everything like that, but like you said, there has to be this like life outside of it, and for her there really wasn't, and she was applauded for all of like the bullet points that she was hitting, and
Yep.
almost also applauded for not engaging in life outside. So then like that became this narrative around it, like, oh, well, I can't do that because I don't get applauded for that, or this isn't recognized as much. And now as she's transitioning into just life and she's realizing it's really hard to navigate, like, do I track my food? Do I not track my food? What if I go out and I have a drink and like, girl, go out and have a drink. Like this is life. And like, you know, it's wonderful to have organization and structure with like macros and everything like that, but if it's at the expense of like having experiences and memories and feeling like less stress and just in this place of harmony, then like is it worth it and is it applicable in the season of life that you're in? So for her, it's all the narratives that existed and the associate, like the emotional associations with like tracking, not engaging in social activities, being a certain weight, like all those emotional attachments that and narratives around that, we kind of have to like now dismantle them to some degree so that she can recognize that like it's okay to go out, like we can now applaud that, like that's a good thing, and like the emotion attached to it shouldn't be this like hypersensitivity or anxious feeling or stressed out because she has to figure out how to not have her phone attached to her and just say, that sounds good, I'm going to eat it and I'm going to be mindful and healthy and like everything's going to be okay. So I think that that's like a huge thing that I find with a lot of people is the transitioning of prep into maybe like an off-season build season, but then even further into like life, like just a lifestyle of you can still be a healthy, fit, awesome individual and not have such like tight restriction and parameters and boundaries. Like there is this place where you can kind of just flow, and that probably will help you to progress even more in many different areas of life.
I want to ask Evan about this because, you know, Evan was coached very differently than how we coach here at Pro Physique, right? Out of your first prep.
Mhm.
Um, So talk to me a little bit about that experience and how that impacted your desire to continue or not continue in the sport.
Well, my first prep, I entered it kind of under weird circumstances, and my coach was a good coach. He did the best he could with me for sure. I didn't give him a lot of work with or not a lot of time, and it was one of those things that, based on the time it was in my life too, it was a big, I wouldn't say savior for me, but it helped keep me grounded
Sure.
during that prep. And then once that prep was over, it was like then I kind of had to face life and everything else that had kind of built up during that time. And that's happened to me on a few different occasions with it. But what it's taught me, through that is that you need a plan for things. And if that plan doesn't work out perfect, that's okay too, because the it's it's not going to make or break anything in your life. And when you kind of understand that, and when things get hard, and Danik, I'm sure you run into this, things always end up getting better on the other side of it. Um, when I didn't get a lot of mental help after the first prep, know what to expect, what to do. So I really try to help my clients understand that. And I also think that this sport attracts, a lot of people with addictive personalities and people that um, think everything has to be done one way when it really doesn't. And I think, it's this sport attracts people that kind of like to go to extremes. And so finding that balance on the other side of things can be really difficult, because for me personally, I really thought about this, but like before I got into bodybuilding, I was like, I would drink and party, right? Like I loved that stuff. And then when I got into the sport, I kind of couldn't, right? And then trying to figure out what that balance was after that. It took me a little time to do that. And I really didn't have anyone to guide me with that either. It was like, if you want to be good, this is the way things need to be done. So with that type of experience I had, I almost didn't want to compete again. I did the first two shows. I was like, I'm done. I'm not even going to do this anymore. I'm not even going to do it. Then I met people in my life to help me kind of steer me back that direction. And a big thing that I like to do with my clients now is help, try to prepare them for things and let them know that it's okay. Especially for earlier competitors that really struggle post show. Um, Even if they fall off the wagon completely for like 2 months and they come back and they're embarrassed of where they are, let them know it's okay, right? Like this is all a learning process with this. If we all had the playbook to get it exactly right the first time, then this would be a pretty boring life. And trying to help people understand that, I think, could be beneficial to them. And part of what we do as a coach is the mental part of it, right? Like I'd probably say that's half my check-ins is more checking on them mentally with it. Because if
Oh, for sure. I say it all the time. We are more therapists than we are physiologists, right?
Yeah,
In understanding sometimes people ask me, why do I think I'm a good coach? It's because I treat everybody differently. It's every single one of my clients has a different requirement from me. And so I try to fit that need for them. Some people need more of the nutrition training, macro, that kind of stuff. And some people need more of the motivation guy, and some people just need the strategy and be told once and they're off and running. They don't need anything else. They don't need motivation. So um, a lot of what you just talked about was coming out of a show. And I think, me and Evan both played sports in college. And so there was a common occurrence when our competition season ended in college, which prepared me for bodybuilding, which was the post-show blues.
mm,
Um, I don't get the post-show blues anymore. I did a show last year, just transitioned. And it was almost like, I was waiting for this letdown, but
Hmm.
I just kept going with my lifestyle. And I'll say this, it's also the show that I treated with the least emphasis on winning. I was only focused on going and having fun, and I had a blast. Um, so let's talk a little about that, Danica, because that post-show blues, that emotional letdown, you go in the gym, you feel aimless, you don't feel like tracking, but you feel out of place if you eat bad, like that weird place. It felt very similar to me when baseball would end. I would be like, I don't know what to do with myself. I'd leave college classes and be like, what do I do now? Because I'm literally not allowed to go to practice. So is that something you also come across a lot?
Yeah. And I have to remind clients, like, you're in a season, right? Like everyone, there's seasons of life, and there are tools, tactics, like there are just certain variables that are very much applicable in each season and not as applicable in other seasons. So to be able to, I think, talk about that as people kind of feel, because there is like, I think with any sport, right? I mean, I played field hockey in college and I danced in college, but after I was done with like my dances or the shows for the season or like field hockey was over, there is this feeling of like, okay, now what? Like I did repetitive thing. Like I had a repetitive schedule. I was very organized. I did this over and over and over again. But that doesn't mean that like that you're aimlessly wandering, even though that feels like it. There are still parts of those seasons that you could apply as you kind of transition out. There may not be a championship that's coming up or a dance recital or a show or whatever it may be, but part of your identity is that you're still an athlete. You're through and through, right?
Yeah.
You can still eat food, you can still train, like you can still drink your water, you still got to sleep, you still got to take care of yourself. And how can we kind of define like what are your goals for this season? And what are those tools or what variables are applicable in this season, right? So if you thought of like a sport, maybe it wasn't like a strict schedule of, all right, I get done with classes at 3 and then I go and I have practice. Well, maybe you don't have practice then, right? So to fill that void, what are you going to do? There's going to be a void there. It's going to feel a little weird at first just because you kind of built this programming system. So how can we kind of fill that void for you? What would be more applicable in the season that you're in? And having like that open discussion, I think is really important before the season ends, like before the post blues, like that comes into play and talking about it, but like continuously talking about it and being more open about it. Like after, I mean, you can apply this with everything. Like I could apply it with pregnancy, having like the build up to a pregnancy and then having the baby. There's this like post like, oh man, like I'm not pregnant anymore. Like now I have to transition to a whole new season. Like, and that's different. Like there are, but I'm still gonna apply certain tools to this season, just not as many of them. So to be able to recognize it's valid, like you're not alone, you reached the top, you hit that goal, and then now you don't, I mean, people say like you don't have that dangling carrot in front of you or anything like that, but you just hit your goal. And that's pretty friggin' awesome, right? That doesn't mean that like you can't set other goals or you can't still strive to be like the best that you want to be. Maybe you just shift direction a little bit more, right? Like now you kind of have to say, all right, well, I hit that destination. Awesome. What were some like, what did I gain from it? What are insights? How can I reflect? And now how can I kind of shift a little direction to another destination? And it can be smooth when you, like for you, you were like, all right, I'm just going to still do my lifestyle. Like you had kind of like a destination, you hit the destination.
I
but
had some ideas
you-
in my head. I knew I
Yeah.
was going to be at a few events and I'm like, well, I still want to look good for this thing and that thing.
Yeah.
So for me, it was less of, it's also, when you've done 15 shows, you're prepared for it. And honestly, it's one of the things I love about coaching competitors is I feel like I'm able to manipulate their post-show blues better because I know how to handle it now. For me,
Yeah.
it starts way before the show. Start talking about possible outcomes for this show and what's the next goal before anything happens. So we know
Yeah.
going into the show, win or lose, what's the next goal?
Yeah.
Because I
I
think,
think, and some things that I've done for my competitors are, why don't you set up like a photo shoot? Like
yeah,
now that we're in this like great fitness level that like you've achieved this aesthetic goal that you wanted to, let's make sure, you take advantage of it and let's get a little bit more photos on for you, like in your social media or whatever you may use it for. But I think that has helped a lot of people to be like, oh yeah, that's such a great idea. I've always wanted to do a photo shoot. Let's schedule that 3 to 4 weeks post show so that I still have something I'm like still working
yeah.
towards.
I think something too that people struggle with. I know it's something I used to struggle with. I don't anymore, but I think a lot of people struggle with, especially newer competitors in the sport, is when you get into a prep, especially like middle towards the end, there's a lot of thought is, oh man, I can't wait to be done with this. I can't wait to not have to do this cardio. I can't wait to be able to go eat what I want. I can't wait to be able to not have to track. I can't wait to be able to not have to do any of this stuff. And then the show's over and you do that for a minute and you realize that didn't make you happy either. So you weren't happy in the moment when you were dieting, doing the cardio, because all you wanted to do was this other thing. Then when that's done and you go do this other thing, you realize this isn't what I want either. I don't feel good. I don't feel like I look good. All that mental, anguish kinds of comes in. And then I think that's where a lot of that lost feeling comes, is because you don't like where you were during prep because it's hard. And then you don't like where you are after prep because there's no structure and you don't feel good. And so it's about trying to learn what that balance is and then enjoying each part of the process rather than looking at it as a punishment on yourself. And I think that's what a lot of people struggle with. I know that's what I've struggled with in the past. And I know that's what a lot of newer competitors, at least that, that I've coached and that I talk with, it's this focus of this is what I want and this is what's going to make me happy. And then when they realize, no, that's actually not what makes me happy. And then they want to go back into that prep mindset, a lot of people with
Right.
it.
Yeah.
And it's this yo-yo back and forth.
There's a sweet spot too. At least I've noticed this for myself and for my competitors, where I would say it's probably like maybe you're 9 weeks out, 8 weeks out, maybe even 10. And there's this sweet spot where you're like, you're really fueled, your cardio is not that intense, you're just like in a good groove, like you have a good rhythm of everything. And your check-ins, like I've noticed during those check-ins, they've been like, I'm feeling great, like everything's great, feel spot on, great sleep, energy's good, strength is good. And I'll say, what's making you feel great in this moment? Like in this moment, tell me what's bringing you happiness and what is kind of fueling that like energy, because that's something that can still be applied as you like, if this is making you happy, like having some sort of like maybe during that 11-10 week mark, you're still having untracked meals or you're still kind of going on date nights or whatever, right? So like you still have that harmony with like you're going out, it's not too intense, you're still structured, but it's not overly doing it. You're not kind of mentally exhausted at that point. So could you still apply some of those things as you're trying to, like, if this is bringing you happiness and contentment and like that feeling of harmony, could it be applied as you head into post show?
Well, and this is so, coaching has changed in the 12 years that I've been doing it full time. When I first started coaching, the term diet break did not exist. I first heard that term from Eric Helms when I was in Australia in like 2013, I think. And I came back from that and I started applying that to my clients with the idea that it was going to make prep better from a physical perspective. What I've noticed, however, is that my clients that have multiple diet breaks in a prep come out of competition season in a much better mental place, right? They're not going into, and I also peak people a bit differently than I used to. I really try to walk the food up going into the show. Like that's my ideal scenario. It doesn't always happen, but if I can walk their food up going into the show and they've had multiple diet breaks, I had, I'll just highlight the two girls that turned pro at nationals this year, which was December 9th or whatever. Christina's maybe 3 pounds up from stage weight and Tiffany's maybe 3-4 pounds up from stage weight. And they're, 250, 270 carb, 60 fat, minimal cardio. But by doing multiple shows, diet breaks, and reversing them into those shows, which those were my ideal scenarios, I think it improves the mental well-being of the athlete after the show. They're not looking at food as the escape. And when I first started coaching, yeah, I was part of the problem too. I would have probably a 50% failure rate on post competition. And by that, I mean competitors being unhappy. So I don't have any judgment. If someone's like, coach, I just want to be 30 pounds over stage weight, cool. But if someone checks in with me 4 weeks after a show and they're like, coach, I need to do a fat loss phase, I'm like, well, that's a problem. You're not going to lose fat after 5 months of prep and 4 weeks of pigging out. You're just not. So I would say my percent is now probably 1%. I probably have 1 or 2 clients a year that struggle post show. total, which is probably the thing that makes me happiest, because for a long time there was a period where I was like, man, am I making people's lives worse by putting them through prep? Like you're coaching human beings, and when you have people that are unhappy all the time, you're like, so there are times now where I tell people, you should not do the show. We do not need to prep right now. You are on too low of calories, too much cardio, you're too food obsessed, and we got too much body fat to lose. This does not end well. So I mean, those are lessons learned, but I think there is a nutritional cardiovascular training aspect to physical fatigue that can wear on your mental state.
For sure.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
I think that makes a lot of sense, Paul, with what you said. Um, the two things that I've really changed over the last year, I guess, with that is number one, when people pick shows, I try to warn them, especially if they're later in the years and later in the year, and it gets close to things like Thanksgiving and Christmas and those type of situations. It can get really, really hard for people that finish up with their first or second show, and they're not used to doing reversing, and then they run into big family event times of the year.
Yeah.
That can be really, really hard. That vacations, we talked about that. That's another big one.
My favorite is coach, the day after the show, I'm leaving for an all-inclusive. I'm like,
Yeah.
oh boy.
Oh, no, right. And then the other one that I think is a big change that I've done is I used to just stair step everyone down really slowly in prep. Now, to be able to implement more things like you're saying, the diet breaks and things like that, which do help a lot mentally with it, is I'll typically get more aggressive early.
Same.
And then give them those mental breaks, because people can press hard early on.
Most competitors would rather put their foot down, than just make small changes. And so I'll bottom somebody out earlier in prep so I can give them more refeeds, diet breaks, etc.
Helps mentally. And then what I've run into too recently, especially this year when we're talking about show planning, is a lot of people say, well, I have a vacation planned around this time. I'm like, sweet. That's a 10-week out mark in prep. We will press hard before that vacation. We're going to use that vacation as a break to reset you mentally and then press back into the show. You can use these type of things to help with the mental aspect of it. And that's always like I say too, because I've had people say, well, we're pressing pretty hard early. I'm like, yeah, well, first of all, if we're 16 weeks out, I'm thinking we're 12 weeks out right now. Let's get, like, the goal is let's be ready like 4 weeks early. Obviously, that doesn't always happen, but we can be ready then we can absolutely stair step food up. And it helps so much on the backside of it. So much on the backside of it.
I think it helps with a scarcity mindset too, because when you have diet breaks or you have, the untracked meals, then you don't become have this association with oh my gosh, I'm never going to get this food for an extended period of time. And then once I get it, I'm never going to get this again. I have to get it all in, right? You realize that it's always going to be there. I can have it mid prep and I have a diet break and the food is going to be there. There isn't this scarcity mentality that then triggers get it all in now. I have to binge all of it now because it won't be there later. It will. A brownie will always be there 25 years from now. They may taste different, but they're still going to be here. But to recognize, to apply those principles helps with that mindset.
Yeah. And also having a positive response to that, I think, gives people the idea oh, okay, so I can actually back off my crazy intensity, because I think some competitors do feel like when they're failing or not progressing, that the only solution is to go harder, do more cardio, miss more sleep, lower your calories, not realizing that the reason that they're not progressing might be they're run down, they're inflamed, their digestion's slow, their hormones are, corrupted from the nutrition. And, so I talk a lot about diet breaks for that reason, because it's almost like a reset to pre-prep, your mindset, your recovery. You feel so good. You almost, I've had clients I feel like I'm not in prep. I feel guilty. And not that, listen, I'm going to get you on stage conditioned, right? So we are going to do double cardio and low calories if we have to. But there's a time and a place for that. And I found the sweet spot is, for a leaner competitor, the leaner you are, the less you can continuously push them, right? So I like 2, 3, 4 day pushes, 2, 3, 4 day recoveries, right? And I think one of the things when I think back to my first prep, the hardest part for me was as a man seeing the scale and my clothing drastically change. Like hearing from coworkers, "Oh, are you still working out?" Because I was wearing the same, button-up shirts, and I just looked 30 pounds leaner, but underneath I looked good. But with my shirt on, I just look a bag of bones, right? So like, is this something you talk to your clients about too? Like, is there an appropriate way to like handle I don't know if it's more of a male thing, because I don't know too many girls that are like, "Oh no, I'm a size 2 now." I don't know, maybe that's a Kate thing, but I do have some girls that are like, "Coach, I just feel skinny." And that's another thing that the diet break can help with.
Yeah, I think body image is huge, right? Like if I know that a competitor going into it isn't like, if they're kind of berating themselves already going into it, then I'm like, ugh, like, let's talk about this first. Let's talk about how we're talking about ourselves, our internal dialogue, and how we see ourselves, and what is something that we're striving for. I do find that some competitors will say like, I just feel like, I have some competitors that have said like, I don't like this feeling. Like I feel like it's uncomfortable to sit on a seat because my bones are sticking out. Like, and I'll say, yeah, like this is an extreme sport. Like this isn't something that is you want to maintain. You kind of want some cushion on your butt as you sit down on a seat. And having those open conversations, like I personally will absolutely say like, how are you feeling when you look in the mirror? And have them like genuinely give me a reflection. I wish someone did that for me, because my husband is pretty blunt, but I remember like through my competitions, the leaner I got, the more applauded I got. And then that's all it was though. There was no other side of it. There was no like, hey Danika, you're not looking that great. Like you look kind of unhealthy and sickly. There was only, because remember when I did like the world competition, like that world championship, I don't think people talked about that. I think like the coaches were like, just good job, you're getting leaner. Look at those striations. You're getting better. You're getting better. There was never a reflection of like, hey, that doesn't really look that good. I mean, my husband gave me that and he was like, you look like a 12-year-old child. So like, let's kind of like, you have great curves to your body. Let's bring those back. Like I want to get my wife back. But it would have been nice for the coaches to have conversations, like for my coaches to have that conversation more. And I've worked with you, Paul. So like you've had conversations with me. So I'm not saying you, but I think that it would have been just beneficial to have good perception of what other people are seeing, as opposed to just being applauded with you're getting leaner, good job, good job, good job, right? Because if that's all I hear, then that's all that is the narrative that's going to become stuck, unfortunately. And then how do you transition like out of that? That's really hard if that's all you've been applauded for, right? So
Yeah.
I think that the way that we see our body is really important as you progress too. And to have your coach remind you that like from the very beginning, like I want, like when people say, I don't want to actually do a show, but I want to look like a competitor. I'll be like, let's talk about that. Like let's really go there, because I'm gonna let you know it's not a healthy look. Like that's not vibrant, that's not healthy. There's a lot of things that you're kind of compromising, and I don't think that would be ideal. So let's talk about that.
Yeah, I
And
think
I think
it's hard to know how lean that is, because you just see it in a picture or a video and you go, "I want to get that lean."
Yeah.
And you don't realize how far past comfortable that person usually is, because they don't display it. They're like, "Hey, look at me,"
Yeah.
Whereas those of us that have been there are like, "Damn, that person worked hard to get there."
Yeah, I think it's important too to know that everybody, like you said, we treat everybody as individuals, and like the rate of understanding, like for me, it took me a while to really, really understand that like that show ready body for me is not healthy for me. Like that's like for my perception of myself to change. Some people it's like quick and easy, right? Like other people it takes like maybe 3 months and then they're like, yeah, I'm done with this and they get out of it, right? But I think that like it's important to understand and give each competitor grace along the way instead of being like, what is wrong with you? Because then it starts to become an internal dialogue too. Like, well, they got their stuff together. Why can't I get my stuff together? Or like, it took them no time at all to transition from like show prep into off season. Why can't I be that good? Well, you can, but give yourself grace along the way. Like, this does require reflection and it requires you to challenge some like belief systems that were created, right? That are programs in our minds. And so for coaches to understand that too, I think is important. Like we all have a tolerance, I think, but for the individual to understand too, that like, as long as they're continuing to trend in the right direction, and as long as we are decreasing negative self-talk or decreasing like the negative body image or the unhealthy behaviors and patterns. If we're trending in the right direction, that's progress. It doesn't have to happen overnight. So that's really important too, because then it takes the pressure off.
Yeah, you hit something that is very important that I think all coaches need to listen to, and that's about being honest with your clients. Because that honesty, like in your situation, shouldn't have had to fall to your husband. That's an awkward spot for him to be in and an awkward spot for you to be in.
Yeah.
I think it's our job as coaches to be the ones, especially when it comes to females, and saying, I know you're happy with this right now. This is not attainable. This is not good for you mentally. We need to reverse out of this. We need to put on a little bit of size. Say it's size here, not weight or anything like that. Because number one, it's going to allow you to be healthy. It's going to help you mentally, physically, your relationships, everything with that. But it's our job as coaches to do that. That's what they pay us for. That's what we are, the unbiased source. We're the one that's supposed to be looking at them and helping them with that. That should not fall on people outside of us. It shouldn't, because like they're going to look at that like from your significant other like criticism, not as what the best well-being is for you. So it's very important as us for coaches, even if it can be awkward at times to have those conversations,
Yeah.
Well, and
And
there's
I think
such a
those are
big
tough.
variation from person to person, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like the human body from person to person is going to be so different in what maintains a lean physique. That's why I kind of stick to the bikini division as far as coaching goes, because I'm just so comfortable with that standard, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm not pushing women to be masculine. I'm not pushing women to sound like men. I'm not pushing women to have facial hair or changes in their facial structure or early aging, or I'm just very comfortable believing that what I'm doing is the right thing, as far as coaching. And they really are making an effort to keep bikini feminine, right? They don't want them too hard. They don't want them too detailed, like they're constantly revamping the requirements of that division. So that, well, I'm never going to say like, oh yeah, if you compete in bikini, you're healthy. Obviously, you're going to be pushing the body, but it's not to an extreme where you might expect to see some really, really bad things happen like you'll see in some of the other women's divisions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think especially for newer competitors too, that typically don't have as much muscle as some seasoned competitors do. When they get smaller and dieted down, it's not always the healthiest look.
Right.
It's not, because they don't have the muscle to support that look yet. Same thing happened with me. Same thing. You brought that up, Paul, when you said, when you were working your job, people like, oh, do you still work out? Because you look so much smaller in those clothes because you didn't have the muscle to fill it out at that point.
Well,
Now
I went,
it's
I
different.
mean, for me personally, I went and bought new shirts. I went from wearing
Yeah.
2XLs because I was 240 to wearing either larges or extra larges.
Mm-hmm.
And then people were like, oh, you're actually in good shape.
Yeah.
My clothes didn't hang on me anymore. So
Mm-hmm.
it was a correction I had to make, because I think all of us that prep the first time have two wardrobes. Your wardrobe at the end
I
of
used
prep.
to. Yep.
Don't throw away those off-season clothes you had before, because they're probably coming back. But yeah, there's definitely like an adjustment. I mean, I've been competing now for 16 years, and now it's for me, it's much more personally satisfying. I
Mm-hmm.
don't care what other people think, but there was definitely an element of like, oh man, someone called me skinny, and that would get in my head, or someone would call me fat, because if you're 12% body fat on the internet, you're fat. So like, those things used to bother me. Now I just realize that's their insecurities that they're portraying, because I would never in my life say something like that to someone, right? Like that's, what is that saying? Hurt people hurt people. Now, whenever I get a negative comment coming at me from whatever, I just go, man, are you okay? Like, that's where my mindset is at. I'm not like angry. I'll like laugh and be like, man, are you all right, dude? Like, you're worried about, this is how I feel. So I think maybe that's a learned response. But
And you're absolutely right. Like there's different people react to different things. I know that, and I would say it's not that many of them, but you know, there are females too that when they get dieted down and they get stage lean, they don't want to change that.
yeah,
They like that because
yeah.
they get the positive reinforcement from that. People like, you look really lean, they get addicted to that. And it's our job to let them know that, you know, their value does not come from that.
Oh,
Like that's
absolutely.
our job. It's not
Especially
significant
girls that
other's
get on
jobs.
stage and do well. They want
Yeah.
that same feeling over and over again.
Constant feedback. Yeah.
And you've got to be like, no, 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 no. The more you do it, the worse you're going to get. And it can become a spiral, right? You know, I've had
Yep.
competitors, I let them go a little too long. They got to take 2 years off because they pushed themselves too far. Now they've come out of the season. They've not been able to stop eating, right? So, you know, lessons learned as a coach comes down to that. Like, sometimes you've got to trust your own instinct and not let the athlete run wild.
Mm.
And even to the point now where if someone says to me, like, now I really want to do another show and I don't agree with it, I'll be like, this is where we're probably going to have to go our separate ways, because I know where this is leading. Even if you succeed at this next show, it's going to put you in a really bad place. I want someone to be successful long term. I don't care about your trophies. I don't care about your pro cards. I care about your longevity in this sport, because that's what to me is valuable. You can compete in bodybuilding until you're 100 years old if you go the right way about it.
And,
Yeah.
and we understand these repercussions, right? And a lot of people don't. And yes, there's exceptions to every rules, but we've seen this happen a lot of times. And we look at something, we're like, this is not going to end well. 99 out of 100 times, it's not going to end well
Right.
with that.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
not.
I mean, listen, there are some people that their lives and their personalities are just robotic in nature, and that's great for them. You know,
And
like,
we know those people
we
stick out, and those people can do that.
we
But
all
those are
know
few and
Doug
far
Miller.
between.
Like, if you guys have spent time with Doug Miller, I think if somebody didn't know him and spent some time with him, they'd be like, oh, he's so narcissistic and he always tracks his food. But that's Doug's personality. That's how he handles his whole life. That's how he handles his business, his finances, his workouts. He writes down every workout. He writes down all his meals. He's not in prep. That's his personality. I have a few clients like that. They're awesome. You don't have to do anything. You just
Yeah.
make minor changes. So I'm not saying that everyone has to have these off seasons where they completely change their habits, but it very much comes down to their personal, you know, and then you also have the client that, like, they're all in for 16 weeks of prep. And as soon as the show is over, they lose their minds. They start bashing competing. This is unhealthy. And I'm like, ugh, yeah, the way you did it, it was. I'm sorry. Like, you literally shut out all your friends, pretended the world didn't exist, ignored all your problems, chasing a trophy. You didn't get it. And now you have a problem.
Yeah. I think those honest conversations are so important. And I know that like they're difficult sometimes with coaches and like, but asking the tough questions honestly will, what is it? Like, yeah, like seeking the truth will set you free or whatever. But like you ask, sometimes it's okay to really care about somebody and to say like, here's where my intentions are coming from. And like you have done that for me, Paul, and like everything was good, but you noticed something and you were like, hey, just checking in here. And I couldn't have thanked you enough to just be like, everything was great, but like you still checked in, and that was important. Like whenever we feel as coaches that something isn't going in the right direction or something kind of feels a little like it's okay, and you should
Well, I
check
think
in.
with you, I think I usually get concerned that you're not gaining weight, you know, but I also have the knowledge of diabetes. So I'm like, okay, so for you, it's not just as simple as just add some more food. You've got to completely change your medication and stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, as a coach, you know, I'm always just looking for, like, if I've seen it before and not said anything. And then 6 months down the road, someone says, well, coach, I didn't want to tell you during prep, but I was binge eating every week. And I'm like, well, I
Yeah.
knew. They're like, how did you know? And I'm like, well, there's signs. You weren't losing weight. Every week your stomach looked washed out. Like you just, there's these weird signs that you just start to notice, but you don't say anything because you don't want to be accusatory. Whereas now I'll just straight up be like, I don't want to say anything, but are you having problems? And, listen, there's no judgment. I'm not here to judge you, but I just need all the information. So I'm always I try to be a little bit more, if I have a thought, say it without coming across as judgmental or harsh or attacking someone.
Yeah.
I mean, you've done that for me, Paul. You've done that for me. It's helpful. Like, and it's
It is.
appreciated. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that also, I think another thing, I mean, it's great for the coaches and we should empower more coaches to do that. Like, be honest, be vocal. Like, we can articulate this in a way that isn't offending somebody. It's just, hey, I'm coming out of a place of concern. And as your coach, the more information I know, the better I can be as a coach, right? I can help you through this. That's my job. But I think as a client too, it is important for us to take ownership of some things that we know, because we all know when things are probably not the best for us. And we all know when we're probably not exhibiting healthy behaviors. So for us to be like, oh shit, all right, here it is, coach. This is what's going on. This is where I'm struggling. Because that is also our job, as coaches, to be like, thank you so much for that information. I can better direct you now. Because if I didn't have this back and forth conversation, we're just kind of winging it. And we're going based off of a perception and a false understanding of how things are going, right? And that's not good. That's not conducive for any relationship. So
Right.
I think it's important for extreme ownership to also happen for the client, and to feel that comes with building rapport with your coach. That comes with a coach saying I'm here for you. And also being able to have the coach direct, you guys have also sent clients to me saying hey, I'm noticing a few things. Could you just have a conversation with my client and see how they're doing? That's my job. So, and it's your job to help them better direct, and it's their job to take ownership as well.
Okay. Well, I think this is a good stopping point. I like this topic, and I feel like there's more opportunity to discuss it. Maybe more niched, like mental health around food, mental health around training, mental health around competing or not competing, body dysmorphia issues. So what I'd like to do is get some feedback on this episode, and then we'll invite you back on, Danika. And then also, if anyone needs help, Danika is available via prophysique.com for consultations. Do I hear your little girls?
Yeah, they're
Wow.
they're locking each other out in the bathroom right now. So
Love it. Love it. This is why I built a separate oasis from my house, because
For
yeah.
you and Spencer.
All right, guys. So, well, thank you for listening for this podcast. I'd like to get some feedback from it, where we can get some more. So if you're watching this on YouTube, leave a comment on topics that are relevant to you around mental health and the sport, or any aspect of kind of physique competition or manipulation. Because like Evan said, it is a sport that attracts strong personality types, whether that be addictive or whether that be, people that just want to not fit in. They feel like bodybuilding is that cool, niche thing that they can do that no one else does, or whatever, counterculture type stuff. And maybe even, I don't know, there's probably a whole culture around scrolling through Instagram and feeling like you're not good enough, thank goodness I grew up reading, Muscle and Fitness, because I knew damn well I didn't look like them. There was no confusion in my mind.
At least we knew we didn't look like Jay Cutler and Ronnie Coleman, right? At least we knew that.
Yeah, it was literally you better wear a baggy shirt till you're 250 pounds, you geek. There was no confusion in my mind. But nowadays, everyone on Instagram has, shredded abs and, whatever, can squat 700 pounds. So I'm sure there's some struggles.
Everyone, all of them.
Yeah.
Everyone. It's
all right,
crazy.
guys. Well, thanks, Evan. And thanks, Danika, for joining us today.
Sure. Thank you for having me on.
All right, guys. Talk to you soon.
Bye.
Pleasure, guys.